Welcome back to Exit 45. Reed Galen. Reed, you're coming to us from Wisconsin.
Yes, I'm coming to you. I actually, Joe, I hate to say this, but we got in so late last night. I'm not entirely sure what town I'm in Wisconsin. But the week started out as beautiful and sunny, and now it is 40 degrees and raining. So the fall has arrived here in northern Wisconsin.
Wisconsin is on my bucket list of places to see. I can't believe I've never been there. My dad used to tell me it's one of his favorite states, but I've never been, but I've heard it's beautiful this time of year in particular.
I was here in July when we did focus groups here in Eau Claire, where I was yesterday, and in Milwaukee. And I'll tell you, it is a terrific place. It is a small town shaped like a state. Everyone here doesn't, near as I could tell, does not seem to be more than 2 degrees of separation away from someone else. And it creates a community. And I've loved it. I mean, we've been to lots of small towns. Everybody has been incredible. The seeds of what we need, Joe, are here. They are
Mhm.
all around us. I think a lot of times we get stuck in the BS of national news and social media and everything else. But I'll tell you, in places like Viroqua or Osseo, where I've been so far, these folks like they go about their day, they take care of each other. Um, I think we can and should learn a lot.
Yeah. What's the sense that you're getting there? Because I mean, I was talking to Santiago Meyer, who's, a youth leader for Gen Z, and he was talking about
Mm.
how Wisconsin's youth vote is not where they expected it to be, the early vote is not where they expected it to be at this point, versus other states. So what is your sense on the ground there?
I was on the campus of University of Wisconsin in Madison on Monday, and the Wisconsin Democratic Party, and then I think there's another group of younger Democrats called Wisco, I think it's called, and they had no shortage of volunteers who were coming up and looking to help out, as opposed to the college Republican table, which was one young woman and one young man, and the poor young man had to dress up in an elephant costume and nobody was coming to talk to them. The vegans had more people talking to them than the Republicans did, just to give you a sense.
No
But
offense to vegans.
what I heard from a lot of them was that, yeah, some of them would vote early, but a lot of them seemed, Joe, pretty intent on voting on election day. Now, I
Hmm.
know that, we all want to bank those votes, and certainly nobody wants to bank them more than me. But it did seem like there were a lot of kids. There was no shortage of enthusiasm. But again, I think a lot of the kids said that they wanted to vote on election day. They wanted to go to a polling place, get their sticker, and make sure that their ballot was cast.
Yeah, that's it's me too. I'm still one of those election day voters. My kids come. I've talked about this where they get the chocolate. So let's talk about what's been going on in the closing days of this election because we've got some
Mm.
closing messaging, so to speak. And Donald Trump's Klan rally at MSG made a lot of news for a lot of reasons. I think it's still sticking, but they're trying to take over the narrative where that comedian talked about Puerto Rico being an island of garbage. And he
Mm.
said some really disgusting things about Latinos and Latinas coming in the country, all that stuff. But like
Yeah.
that, Trump is trying sort of to distance himself from, despite his sanitation worker cosplay yesterday, which we could talk about too. But what's just the contrast of that closing message versus Kamala's ellipse speech, which I had the pleasure and privilege of being in attendance for. But that's closing messages. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, MSG was one of those situations where I think the reason why the messaging first, as you noted about Puerto Rico, and then more broadly about the Latino population broke through was because it was in New York City, because
Mhm.
everybody saw it, because the things that comedian in particular said, not to mention all of the other insanity, right? That place was insane. I guess the Berlin Sport Palast was booked or something. They couldn't use it, but it broke through because it wasn't in Osseo, Wisconsin. It wasn't in Mesa, Arizona. It wasn't in southeastern Georgia or central North Carolina. It was on the stage in front of the entire country, in front of the entire world, in front of the entire press corps. And remember too, Joe, that when that guy told that joke, like even the crowd didn't laugh.
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
even the crowd of like MAGA diehards didn't think it was funny. It wasn't funny, but even they, sort of instinctually like, yeah, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done that. So
Mhm.
I think that's why it had so much purchase in the political mindset. Remember, for me, um, you know, campaigns are often a lot like football games. You might have 100 plays in the game, but only 4 or 5 of them are going to matter. And
Mhm.
that was one of them, which was if there was anything that was going to potentially start to change the dynamic of, either undecided or uninspired voters, that very well could have been it, especially because, there are hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans in places like uh, Pennsylvania and Michigan and so many other places around the country. We should remember, and it seems silly to say this, because it is part of the United States,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
you don't need a passport to come here from Puerto Rico
Right.
because it is part of the United States.
Mhm.
So I think that was really what you saw. And then look, I did not see the vice president's speech on the ellipse, but I did listen to her speech last night here in Madison, Wisconsin. We were doing some stuff with a local radio network that we're partnering with on our bus tour, Civic Media. So we were doing a little play by play, and she was fired up. The crowd was fired up. And that was one thing that we noted was that she was making a closing argument about what she would do for the American people or try to do on behalf of the American people, which I think is important because you can run against Donald Trump all you want, but as you know, we've been doing this for so long. If you're going to do that, you have to do it in a very particular way. And it's, and at this point, I think if there's an undecided voter, Joe, like I'd like to meet this person and
Yeah.
find out like how badly they need a suntan because they've been in a cave for many, many months. Um, so yeah, I thought that her closing message was good. You mentioned before we started talking, President Biden's remarks. Look, I think regardless of where an apostrophe was or everything else, at some point you just don't have to say anything.
Mm.
And I think that's the lesson to take from there is look, we wouldn't be where we are with Joe Biden. That's a good thing and a bad thing.
Mm.
But at some point, if it's not his campaign,
Exactly.
it's not his place to say those things. And I know that some people are going to get really mad at me. It from my perspective, it's not disrespectful to say that. That's me observing that, we're on the bus yesterday, and that was the thing we were talking about. Because again, the only thing that can save Donald Trump at this point is white voters, in particular white men. So why give them anything to latch onto when they're already sort of dispirited and depressed? And now they've got, as you noted, they've got something to latch onto.
Yeah, as we saw with Brett Favre, of of all people, Brett Favre, who steals from the poor, was at Trump's hate rally last night and leaning into this "we're not garbage" thing. And it could be very well
Brett
be
Favre
emotive.
is in fact garbage.
Yeah, thank you very much for saying that. Yeah, fuck you, Brett Favre. Like, fuck you.
He
That's
stole. He stole. Remember, Mississippi is the poorest state in the nation, I believe.
yeah,
He diverted at least I think $5 million to a volleyball center to be built at the Southern Mississippi University or University of Southern Mississippi, where his daughter was playing volleyball. Um, and then Joe, as someone told me yesterday, she ended up transferring to LSU, so never even played there anyway.
mm,
Right. And
yeah,
that's in addition to the $1 million he received for speeches he never gave. So like this, like he's actually the perfect Donald Trump surrogate.
yeah,
Right.
right.
But yeah, but remember that MAGA does righteous indignation better than anyone.
They do, and the fact that we are at a point where somehow the press and everybody else can say, well, Donald Trump's opinion on Latinos or Latinas, it's not reflected by what a comedian said. That we don't have enough data now, not enough proof, enough evidence, enough moments of time where he's
Hmm.
said horrific things. The first thing he ever said when he launched his campaign was about
Right.
Mexicans being rapists and drug dealers. And yet we're
Right.
at this point where we're like, well, they're still waffling over, can he distance himself from it? Did he distance himself from it while tethering Kamala, who is the candidate, to something that the president, who is not running, said or didn't say, apostrophe or not apostrophe. She's the candidate. So we're still doing this like again, it's like Van Jones said, basically she still has to just be perfect all the time to the point where it's not even what she says is held against her. But what Donald Trump endorsed had someone upload into his freaking teleprompter and then didn't disavow at all for hours and hours later because they were internally fighting, probably because he didn't want to disavow it. But like that we're still there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Donald Trump threw paper towels to people who were decimated during a hurricane and was joking about it the other day as well. And I just don't understand how this is still possible. She didn't
well,
even
look,
say what Joe said.
no, and again, you have to. This is where I think we have to learn how to fight better
Mm-hmm.
collectively.
Mm-hmm.
My Democratic friends need to learn how to fight better, which is, um, oh yeah, Joe Biden said that. Well, I don't know what he meant. Whatever. How about the fact that the Elon Musk supported and paid for super PAC is out with an ad calling Kamala the C word,
What?
right? Yeah, and it doesn't say the C word, it says the C word, right? Now, I'm sure if you ask them, they'd say, "Oh, we're saying we're meaning communist." But I think that's the whole point, Joe, is like, well, you want to get down in the mud, like here's a guy who made fun of an entire, island of Americans, millions of Americans, and then add on to that, that Trump's, ordained super PAC. Ron DeSantis's people is out there making this ad calling, saying, don't vote for the C word or whatever. Like, so there's always like, you can always, if you're looking for darkness, you can always find more on the Trump side. And that's where you just can't let him get away with it, right? Like, okay, wring your hands. Biden shouldn't have said, and shouldn't have said anything. Okay, get back on offense, right?
Yeah.
Keep punching.
Yeah.
Remind people that, yeah, Biden's always had a slip of the tongue, but
Hmm.
let's be clear, like Trump is an asshole. He's a terrible person. He surrounds himself with terrible people, and they're not going to be better if he wins.
Right. And Kamala did say, I think she handled it very well. She said, I believe he responded to what he meant. And she said, I was giving a speech at that time, when when that story was breaking, saying I would be a president for all Americans. She also said, I don't believe you should, criticize anyone for how they vote. And I thought that was a strong message. And her message at the ellipse was 1000% what she will be doing, what she will be promising for all Americans, not just for the people who vote for her, because unlike Trump, that is, important to her. That's what Democrats, that's the mantle on which they govern. But her lip speech was incredibly powerful. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is out there last night, I think. Was it in this when he looked like Ronald McDonald?
It was in Green Bay, yeah.
Yeah. Or he
Here in Green
said,
Bay.
was it last night or was it the night before? He says he'll protect women again, but this time he went further and he said he was told by his campaign not to say that, which is a question that I'm going to ask you why. Why would his campaign say, don't say I'm going to protect women? I know the answer, but I'm curious to your take. So he says that out loud. Then he says, I'm going to protect women whether they like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, holy shit. That's clearly we need to protect ourselves from him, but that is so predatory and so terrifying. But saying that his campaign said, don't say that, he said 4 weeks ago. I mean, obviously, they know he shouldn't say that because he's a predator. But I mean, what do you think? How are women
Yeah, because
hearing
they
that?
try. Well, you tell me, but I mean, I would say this is that when I saw that, I thought, well, this has been Trump's animating spirit for the better part of 60 years. So,
Yeah. Right.
like I wasn't surprised at all
Mm-mm.
that they told him not to say it. Yeah, because they're like, this is close. Don't do anything stupid. The problem is, of course, Trump is one of those guys, right? He's got he's got the defiant disorder. If you try and tell him to do something, he'll do the opposite just to show who's boss.
Yeah.
And remember too that the guys he's talking to, that's music to their ears, right? That's the stuff they want to hear. These are look, Vice President Harris can't impugn people who people vote for, but I can, right? Which is like if you're so small and so weak and think so little of yourself that you think that Donald Trump is the person who's going to save you, then no, I don't have a lot of respect for you. Do I
Mm-hmm.
respect the fact that maybe you take care of your family and you go to work, all that? Like, okay, great. Yeah, but that's what you're supposed to do. Now you've made a positive decision to vote for somebody who represents the worst of America, the worst instincts of otherwise normal human beings, and gives license and has given license, Joe, for 10 years for people to believe the jokes like he told were funny. Like, I got two daughters, right? Like, I don't think that's funny. I don't want Donald Trump and his goons in charge of what they can and can't do. I don't want the government of any kind telling me what I can and can't do when it comes to my family, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's not American. That's certainly not conservative, right? Whatever the definition of that is now. And so I thought, like, okay, you want to get back on your front foot, like they should be running that into every female voter who hasn't cast a ballot yet, on rinse repeat, right? Wash, rinse, repeat over and over and over again. Um, because again, like, these people always tell you, Joe, what they want to do. His
Mhm.
definition of protecting women is a very different definition of what you and I think in the context of protecting women.
Right. And it certainly isn't protecting women now that we live in a post-Dobbs world, where we live in the world where Donald Trump protected women by stripping us of a fundamental human right, because the protecting women that many red states are displaying right now means leaving women to die because they are having miscarriages. We have yet another two more in Texas now, women who died because they could not and were refused abortion care, miscarriage care. Amanda Zarowski was at the Ellipse speech and her husband spoke, and her husband is a representative as well of the men, the Dobbs dads, as we call them, the men right now who are motivated by living in a world where Donald Trump's version of protecting women means denying them care. It's what a woman hears, what a woman heard. As a woman, I can say that again, it was predatory. But that because we now know that it is women are dying, young girls are dying, 65,000 pregnancies resulting from rape in 2 years in just 14 red states. That's what it looks like to be protected under Donald Trump. So a lot of women are extremely motivated right now, which is freaking them the fuck out. And Charlie Kirk is obsessed with this because disproportionately large number of women are voting, early voting. And he's like, men, you got to get out there unless you want a Kamala presidency. And he's really, really upset about the fact that Kamala is leaning into this idea of telling women that their votes are secret, of telling them their husbands don't need to know. He's like, you're going to defy your husband. He's probably out there earning a living so you can. And then he hesitated before saying something really stupid, like get your nails done or your hair done. And then he said, live a nice life. But they're really freaking out about this silent Kamala vote where women are being told, and I agree, this is 100%, it's a good message to pass along, that their votes are secret and that they don't have to vote along with their husbands. But what do you think about that silent Kamala vote and about telling women their vote is secret?
I think it's real, Joe. I think there was a Marquette University poll here in Wisconsin that came out yesterday, and I think there was a new CNN survey. And in some of these places, the gender gap was like +3 for Harris, +4 for Harris, plus I think in maybe with Michigan it was like +16 or something. But like I believe it's probably closer to +16 than it is to +3.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, maybe when respondents are talking to a pollster, they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump." But the idea that the gender gap for that Kamala Harris is only up 3 with women on Donald Trump is like, if that turns out to be true, Joe, then like I'm not going to eat any hats. I'm just going to go find another career because that's like that just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. And we've heard anecdotal evidence in places like Pennsylvania, exurban and rural Pennsylvania, of women saying just that to our volunteers. My husband doesn't know what I'm going to do in the polling place. There are now stickers that are popping up all over stalls in ladies' rooms across the country saying, your husband doesn't know what happens when you go in the voting booth. And I think that's right. But I think it's also, if I might indulge me for a second, take a step back. One, the idea that there were 65,000 rapes, right, is
Reported. Those are only reported.
reported. I mean, that is, we have a lot. I know we call a lot of things epidemics, but that is that's a pandemic
Yeah.
of of crime,
Yeah.
and which is all based on power and anger and strength versus perceived weakness. The second piece is the idea that Charlie Kirk represents any version of normalcy.
Right.
in any world,
Right.
right? Like this is a guy who's like in his late 30s, still hangs around on college campuses. Like he's a creep,
Hmm.
right? He's a freaking creep.
Yeah.
And I think about it, to go back to my paleo libertarian days, Joe. Like there used to be this expression which is like, I don't care what you do, just don't try and do it to me,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I see the same thing. Like, I'm not going to try and do anything to you, right? Just leave everybody alone. And that's the
Mhm.
one thing that, like, as a former Republican, individual liberty, the right to live your life as you see fit, to pursue happiness as you define it, right, was core to big R and Republican and small C conservative values. Now that's all gone. We're going to tell you what to do based on a set of principles, frankly, that Joe, none of them live up to, right?
Nope.
That's the other part too, is like these people are all hypocrites,
Right.
right? I mean, look every day, at least now almost twice a day, there is an evangelical youth leader being picked up for the abuse of a child, typically the sexual abuse of a child,
Hmm.
right? Like, as I have said before, this is a group of people who needs to get their own house in order, figure out their own morality before they start telling you and me what our morality is. Because again, it's all about power. And I think we misrepresent, misunderestimate, whatever you want to say. I'll go back to my Bushisms, right? The strategery here, Joe, is like to cloak male dominance, an overarching patriarchy, and the idea that you're quote unquote freeing women from the cubicle, right? Giving them the opportunity to stay home, to wear the apron, to look like June Cleaver. I mean, it wasn't real in Leave It to Beaver,
Right.
right? It wasn't real in the Donna Reed show. And it's
Mm-mm.
certainly not real now.
Right. And we've got Harrison Butker out there saying, I know women really want to be at home. I know that's what they really want more than a career. It's like, no, bitch, I want it all. Like, and I'm
Let's be
entitled to.
clear. No one, no, if you're a football fan, no one takes anything a kicker or a punter says seriously. I mean, I will say this, that Pat McAfee is the only punter who's ever made good, right? Post career, because he
Mm.
has a very unique sort of take on the world and people love it. But like, no, like Harrison Butker, like you're so weird. Like the rest of the team doesn't practice with you,
Right.
right? Like you were off by yourself with the rest of the kicking team doing whatever it is you do all day. Like no one's like, oh, what? Yeah. Hey, Harrison, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, well, the wife and I got a nice little weekend planned. Got to go to Home Depot and blah. Like, no one asks Harrison Butker what he's doing, right? Nobody wants to know. They're all like, that guy's a freak.
They're all doing shots with Travis and Jason and Kelsey in a bar
Yeah,
with
right.
Taylor
Like in a,
Swift.
in a in a world of Harrison Butker's, be Travis Kelsey. How
Right.
about that?
Right. Perfect. I mean, like the idea that here's what I think about Charlie Kirk. I think Charlie Kirk, just looking at Charlie Kirk and the fucking gigantic cranium that he's
Hmm.
got, it's like
I know. On Tuesday night, he's going to cry himself to sleep on his giant pillow.
his gigantic pillow head.
And if
Lance,
anybody
no.
out there doesn't get this joke, I am very sorry.
Me too. Me too. But it is probably one of the funniest movies of all time.
It is.
Oh God. But here's what I think about Gigantic Cranium. Charlie Kirk. He probably never got laid, right? Like he never got pussy. That guy never got laid. And he was sitting in his parents' basement, like jerking off, angry jerking off because no chicks would ever touch him. And he's a classic incel. I know I'm going down a dark path here, but he got a little bit of power because he was able to like figure out how to make other dudes like him feel like it wasn't their fault. And then when it gives them a little club of dudes who can't get laid and it's not their fault. And right. So obviously that's how he kind of grows. Then he finally gets laid and then that lady fucking marries him. Go figure. But now he's like, well, I'm going to seek retribution on all those bitches who wouldn't fuck me because I'm going to exert my power over them and bring them back into the 1850s. When he was talking, I was listening to that. What I was hearing is he would very much like for us not to have any autonomy at all. This idea that we're being gaslit into thinking that these predators will protect us by subjecting us to their oppression is insane. But that is very much what he would like. And a lot of this is driven by dudes like him, dudes like Josh Hawley, dudes like Harrison Butker, who I think are probably overcompensating for a lot of things that they just don't want to talk about. And that's
Right.
generational, probably. But like Charlie Kirk, I think this is about punishing women for rejecting a lot of these dudes. Like, look at them. They're unexceptional by most metrics.
I think that's probably true. I think also there's a massive lack of, collective lack of self-esteem that leads to a lot of this
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's, that there's a whole, conversation that has to be had around, guys, especially white guys in this country as we move forward, which is, if you tell a bunch of white guys that you hate them, they are not going to listen to you when you ask them to come back and be normal,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
I think that's one. But you take Charlie Kirk or that guy Johnny McEntee, right? Like I mean, the thing that, you know, I mean, look, a lot of men, and this is not new, Joe, as you know, but a lot of men are intimidated by smart women, by strong women. They don't like the idea of a woman being smarter than them or more successful than them, because it threatens, their version of what masculinity should be, and frankly, not just their version, but what society tells us masculinity is.
Right.
Um, and so that degenerates, as you said, into something very ugly, very quickly. And when you are then surrounded by other people and an ecosystem like we have seen in the last 10, 20, 30 years of, look, let me back up. When you go to Fox News in New York on 6th Avenue, right? All of the women look exactly the same. They're all in very high heels, very short skirts with very red lips, right? And all the guys look like me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's all you need to know,
Right.
right? It's the MAGA sexual dynamic in a microcosm, which is there's an expectation that like the women will be sexualized and the men can be whatever they want, and they're in charge. And I think that's it's old, it's ancient, right? It's not the case anymore. But again, remember that all of this is about trying to stop a cultural freight train that has been on the move for the better, really since the 19th Amendment was passed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's something that they don't like because again, it goes back to something that is, I think, very fundamental, which is, you know, white guys have run the world for 2,000 years, right? It's been a good run for white men. It's
Mm-hmm.
not as if white men are not going to still possess a predominant amount of, call it power, wealth, opportunity in the next 100 years. I think what's really, I'm going to use the word interesting, Joe, but it's not the right word, is that, the Republican Party used to have this expression, right? A rising tide lifts all boats, right? Now, they don't want you to have a boat. They don't want you to be in the water. They don't want you to have access to the dock, unless you're going to be an oarsman or an oarswoman, right? Just doing the work and being told what you want to do. And to mix my metaphors, think about like a pie. The idea here is, okay, well, in their world, it's zero sum. If I have a piece of pie, you don't. And if
Mm-hmm.
you have it, I don't, and I want it back, as opposed to saying, how do we make the pie bigger? How do we
Right.
make opportunity more prolific so that more people can, again, do the things they want to do, provide the things they need to provide, in a way that, provides some level of comfort, stability, ability to look past just the next day or the next
Mm-hmm.
paycheck. And for them, they don't care about any of that stuff. It's how do I maintain my authority, my power, and then bow to my wealthy and religious overlords. Like I know I'm a little bit on a rant here, but that's what these people are. Like this is not 21st century, like what I would think, what I would have thought we were battling in the 21st century in the United States of America, right?
Right.
But we should also know that like this fight goes back a long, long way. I mean, back to FDR, when, they said he was a communist, Joseph McCarthy, Lee Atwater, uh, you know, Roger Ailes, Rush Limbaugh, and now Trump, right? Like there's always been this thread of this stuff. The difference is that it was all, guys like me didn't pay enough attention to it. The country didn't have to really pay enough attention to it because it was sort of tamped down under the surface. It sprang up when Trump arrived, and now like we're all, here we are now, less than a week away from election day, and we're all, you and me and so many others are 24/7 trying to figure out how to, cut enough heads off the hydra that we get across the line on the November 5th, and that we can, take a deep breath and say, okay, where we got to go now because the fight won't be over.
Right. No, it won't be over. And it's interesting because here we are at this intersection of moving forward with a black woman president, right? Or them wanting to pull us backwards with a white racist, rapist, convicted felon. Uh, that's kind of it's sort of the perfect metaphor, really, because it shows you what
Right.
they are terrified of because we're here. We're right there, right? She very much could be president, and that scares the shit out of them because they know that that is reflective of what is actually happening, that is making them sort of double down on all of this, so much so that they can't imagine it's going to. I mean, Obama broke their brains enough, like the 19th Amendment broke their brains enough, the Civil Rights Act broke their brains enough, like this, that a black woman could possibly be the president of the United States, it to them it typifies the existential threat to their hold on all this power. And it's so interesting because it does feel like, we talk about this all the time. It really does feel like a cliff. I mean, it's that if they had their way, not only would they be the only ones on the boats, but we would and eating the pie, but like the women would be back baking the freaking pies and
Hmm.
waiting for them to eat their other pie because
Right.
that's all they think women would be good for. That's honestly, if they had their way, that's what they would like. And Donald Trump really kind of embodies all of that because it's the control of women. I mean, JD Vance is also embodies all of it. He wants no fault divorce to be gone. Like this is he wants to keep abused women in their abusive marriages. Like this is where we're at. This is the moment. This is the binary choice before us. And for women, for so many groups, LGBTQ plus groups, for so many groups, this is the binary choice before them. And what Donald Trump represents versus what Kamala represents is going backwards to a time that is so oppressive and so repressive. Meanwhile, Kamala doesn't want to do that to white dudes. She wants them to have some bigger pie, not that kind of pie, but not what, you know what I mean? You're
I
following
don't.
me.
The pie metaphor is off the rails.
Sorry. You did it.
I'm.
This is what your
I
fault.
know. I'm sorry.
You
I
can't
brought it
have
up.
something
I'm
I can
sorry.
use as you know what I mean? Like I can, the double meaning of pie. But either way, Kamala wants to have everybody, the boats lifting thing. That's what she wants. She would have all the MAGA Trumpers, Republicans, etc., if they still exist, in the water, all the boats rising. Trump would have the opposite. So that's definitely the binary choice. And I think I know women are acutely aware of this in this moment. My daughter is 11 years old. She is acutely aware of what's at stake in this election for women and for girls.
For sure.
Yeah. So last thing, okay, what should we be looking for? Do you think, what will we not know on the day after? What do you think that the next 2 weeks are going to look like?
I think that if Kamala Harris wins by a lot, ironically enough, I think that that might help diffuse some of the burgeoning trouble that we're already starting to see
Yeah.
in places like Washington State, where ballot collection containers or ballot bins are being burned.
Republican
There's
president?
already there's a lot of weirdness, rumors of stuff going on in Pennsylvania. I think the more that it looks like she is going to wipe the floor with him, I think there's a lot of otherwise, fired up MAGA people who probably don't want to go to federal prison after they've seen 900 other people go to federal prison for doing stuff like this. But what I would say, Joe, is I think it's really important for all of us to remind ourselves and remind everybody else like that there's no place for violence anywhere in this process, right? The whole reason for democracy is so that every individual voice has their opinion as opposed to a very small group of people making the decisions for all of us. And we can get into there's a whole other philosophical aspect to that. But the point is, for the next 5 days, you got to get out there. You got to work hard. Go to jointheunion.us. We got thousands of volunteer opportunities. All of our 140 plus partners, like they need people on the phones. They need people texting. They need people, if you can, going out to the doors. Look, this is going to be one on the ground now, Joe.
Hmm.
Look, I mean, I've been all over the place. These ads are terrible. They're endless. They're
Yeah.
not making the difference anymore. They're mind numbing. And again, we could do a whole show on how bad ad production is for most of these people.
Hmm.
I mean, they're just terrible. So now it's going to come down to the campaigns, and campaigns matter on the margins, which is the Kamala Harris campaign, the Democratic Party, they have thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of fired up volunteers, people who are hitting the doors and hitting the phones every day. And Donald Trump has entrusted his get out the vote game to Elon Musk, mistake number one, and Ron DeSantis's political operation, mistake number two, not only because they're not very good, but also because they hate him. And
Yeah.
so I think that, I feel confident that the vice president has more votes available to her than Donald Trump does, and I think that she should win on the numbers. But to your other point, we should assume that there will be more trouble in the next week, not less. And I think that, for anybody who's watching or listening to this, if you're at a polling place and you see something you don't think is right, tell someone, right? Tell local law enforcement, tell the registrar, tell the poll worker, right? I talked to a poll worker in Madison, Wisconsin on Monday night. He said they're getting extra instruction on what to do if something looks like it's developing or something is not kosher. And
Mm.
so, the poll workers in many of the places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, where we worked so hard, Joe, in 2022 to make sure the pro-democracy candidates would be in charge here. Like they know what they're supposed to be looking for. If you see it, say something to them, right? The fastest way to ensure that we don't have trouble is to make sure that we nip it in the bud as it's trying to develop. Look, I think that 4 years ago, a lot of the stuff that the Trump people did was ad hoc. They didn't know what they were doing. They do know what they're doing now. Madison Square Garden, if it was anything, was a giant stereo speaker out to crazy land, right? It didn't have to tell them exactly what to do. It just had to tell them that this was the time to start getting ready to do it.
Mm.
And so, everybody's just got to strap in. Again, remind everyone, Republicans, Democrats, independents, like violence is not the answer. It's never been the answer. It's why we have democracy, so that we can address our issues and our conflicts in a nonviolent, civil way, as opposed to picking up, swords and shields and beating each other over the head with them.
Yeah, political violence is the enemy to democracy, and that is definitely what they have been stoking. And it seems much more deliberate. I know I'm going to wrap up, but last week in particular, it seems like the polling places have become the new sort of front lines, where they're really testing this idea of wearing MAGA merch, and then being told that they can't, because you can't. I don't know if it's every state. I know that my state, you cannot wear campaign merchandise, campaign insignias. You can't wear any of that inside the polling places. And now what they're doing is taking their clothes off, like that lady took her shirt off and then called the poll worker, I believe, or told the poll worker to do something to her C word. And JD Vance posted that she was a patriot for that. So they're definitely making this an intentional threat, and fear is very powerful. People are going to be afraid to vote. People are afraid to volunteer to be poll workers, etc. By the way, they wouldn't be burning ballot boxes if they thought that their policies were popular. And the guy who did you see the guy who burned the ballot box? Oh shit, Google it. He looks like the inconceivable guy from Princess Bride if
Oh,
he
really?
crawled out of a cave. Like if
Yeah.
he was like
Right.
Osama bin Laden. It's like they had a baby. It's the guy's fucked up. I'm not surprised he burned ballot boxes. But yeah. So okay, well, Reed, this is the last chat before election day that we will have, but I hope to talk to you. I plan to talk to you about this post-election day, which is probably going to be crazier than it even is now. But
Right.
thank you again for your time and your insight, and yeah, all of your invaluable perspectives on all of this stuff. And I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. That's just my resting state when it comes to things like this. So that's where I'm going to reside. And then to Reed's point, if you're feeling like you need to do something and get involved, which I know so many people who are right now, like go to jointheunion.us, you said, right?
Hmm.
There's something for everyone. It's not like one size fits all. There is something everyone can do, big and small, postcards, calls, canvassing,
Right.
just talking to your friends, talking to your friends and neighbors. If you know somebody who's like, I'm not voting, blah, 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 talk to them, right? Like
Right.
say, maybe they don't realize what's at stake. Maybe they don't realize that it impacts them as much as it does. So there's
Right.
something we can all do. But thanks for what you're doing, Reed, and enjoy Wisconsin in the freezing cold, although I'm sure it's still beautiful. And well, that concludes this episode of Exit 45. And thank you again, Reed Galen. Everybody, just dig in. We're going to get through this. And I believe that right will prevail. That is what I honestly and truly believe. So see you next time. Bye, Reed.
Bye.